Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this next panel for East Brunswick Public Library Local Author Day. If you're tuning in from online as well, we're glad that you're here. This next panel is Embracing Local History and Folklore, and I have with me a great lineup of authors: Neil Stoffers, Mark Nonestied, Ethan Reese, and Angus Gillespie. So I know each of you have written about local history at some point, and I'm just kind of curious to get started. Where do you each draw your inspiration from? Where do you each draw your inspiration from?
When did I start?
Where do you each draw your inspiration from for writing? Yes.
Okay, my inspiration, life experiences, what I've researched. One of my books was on the Chinese in New Jersey, and that was my master's thesis. So then just what people mention. They may mention something that piques my interest, and I'll look into the subject. And just everyday life and observations of everyday life. I wrote an oral history of the Newark Fire Department, and that began because I took a class in oral history, and the first thing the professor said was, to have a good oral history, you have to have good storytellers. And if you've ever been around a firehouse table, there's nothing but good storytellers there. The stories just flow. So that inspired me to start that.
Thank you. Really the inspiration comes from the community we live in. I mean, when we're talking about local history, whether it's our East Brunswick or the county or the state, there are many stories that are within our community. And so, that's the easiest place to draw that inspiration from. We're very fortunate because we live in an area, in a region that has a long history, going back well over 300 years, and if you include Native Americans, it's even much longer than that. So, we're fortunate to live in an area that's very rich in history. There's many stories there to tell.
Yeah, I think Mark pretty much summed it up, but I mean, what inspired me to write some of the stuff that I've written, a lot of it is on stuff that haven't really been written about. Like, I don't know if any of you have read any of my Tap Into articles about the history of certain places in the area, but there hasn't, like, for the stuff that I've written, there hasn't really been a detailed account of some of this stuff. So, I'm inspired by, anything that might be of interest and, bring a whole new perspective of it in a way that, hasn't really been done before.
Yeah, my name is Angus Gillespie, and my most recent book is Port Newark and the Origins of Container Shipping. So, Port Newark and the origins of container shipping, how did I get into it? So what was my inspiration? To make the long story short, it was back in the 1990s, and I was teaching a summer school course at Rutgers called Maritime Adventure. It was a credit and a half, and we did a lot of field trips. And one field trip was to the Coast Guard station at Sandy Hook, and another field trip was to the Naval Weapons Station at Earl, and the third trip was to Port Newark. And at Port Newark, we had a tour of the port sponsored by the Seamen's Church Institute, and I was so taken away with the trucks and the containers. It was so busy. I said, well, there's something here. There's a story to be told. And that was my original inspiration. So there's a connection between the teaching and the research.
Yeah, thank you. Those were all great answers. And this kind of ties into my next question is, I'll repeat it a few times. What aspects of your creative process do you enjoy the most, and which do you find the most challenging, and why? I'm kind of curious
What I enjoy the most is what I call flow. It's when I'm no longer writing the story. The story is writing itself, and I'm just moving the pen. And that's usually how I write. I write with a pen because I can't type quick enough to keep up with the flow. The most challenging part is editing that after you write what you wrote down with the flow. Because you have to make it more concise, you have to make it more coherent, and it's also like you're just ripping apart what you just created. So, but you have to be cold-hearted when you do it. So those are the two. The best is the flow, and the worst is cleaning up after the flow.
I think what I enjoy the most is the research. Whether it's doing research in the field, whether you're in archives, looking at documents or photographs or other written manuscripts, or even nowadays, so much has been digitized and available online. That research is often where the storyline develops. It bubbles out of that. And it's also where you can make many new discoveries. You can learn about things that have yet to be understood, that are part of your storyline that you're going to talk about. Again, for me, it's always been the research. I think one of the most challenging parts is making sure that when you talk about history, that you're telling everyone's story. We live in an incredibly diverse state, community, and that diversity has been a part of our storyline since the very beginning. And so to make sure that we tell everyone's story about African Americans, about women, their experiences through history were different than other segments of the population. So in order to tell the most complete story about the past, it's important that we bring everyone's story to light. And that can be challenging, but it's something that needs to be done in order to present the most complete picture out there about our past.
Yeah, I was pretty much going to say what Mark said. Just the researching and just finding out about whatever it is you're researching on. I mean, we're gracious. We live in a time now where so much of that stuff is easily accessible at home now. But, there's still a great amount of material that, you can only find in, certain places. So, when putting this book together, I was fortunate that I had this vast collection of photographs that were mostly provided by the East Brunswick Museum, and just the fact that I can choose which photos to use. I really got to enjoy bringing these photographs to a whole new light. Now, as far as the most challenging, obviously meeting the deadline, obviously there were certain things that the publishing company wanted to have fixed, and so when putting this book together, there were obviously some fixes we had to do, and we had to meet this deadline so that we could get this out at a certain date. But obviously the good overweighs the difficulty. So yeah, I think I really enjoy doing what I do.
Well, my most recent book is Port Newark and the Origins of Container Shipping. And so what aspects do I enjoy the most? I think the aspects that I enjoy the most were the interviews, meeting the people, the merchant sailors, the truckers, the longshoremen, the Sandy Hook pilots, the harbor pilots. Gathering this information through the interview process is something that I greatly enjoy. What did I find most challenging? You'd be surprised. The thing I found most challenging was putting together the photographs for the book, because ever since 9/11, you're really not allowed to take photographs at Port Newark. I said, my goodness, my editor wants 25 photographs. The law says no photographs. What am I supposed to do? So I had to find workarounds. One of the workarounds is there are stock photo companies that I can purchase the rights to use. The other thing is I had a friend who was a chaplain, and who's going to challenge a chaplain who has a clerical collar? And he had some good photographs. So the stock photographs, the chaplain, and the other trick that I learned is, no, you can't take photographs at the port. That's against the law ever since 9/11. It's a security issue. But if you're on a boat, you can, you only need the permission of the captain of the boat, and you can take a picture of the port from the boat. So there were workarounds, but it wasn't easy. That was the trickiest part. But in the end, I'm very pleased that my book, Port Newark and the Origins of Container Shipping, does have a number of good photos.
Okay, thank you. And I think I have a follow-up question for each of you, because you've each touched on like hidden histories and finding these untold stories. So how did you go about even getting started finding these stories? Oh, how did you go about finding these untold stories? Like I know, Neil, you mentioned going to like firefighters, but how did you even get started? Did you just, yeah, I know, because like how do you start with this whole research process? Like I'm just really curious about that as well.
So I cheated. I'm a Newark firefighter. I'm a Newark fire captain, retired. So when I say they were telling stories around the firehouse, I was involved with that, telling stories too. Then from there, you just, you would hear stories from one firefighter or chief, captain, whatever, and then that would inspire you to move on to another. And different men have different views of it. If you talk to a man about fighting a fire, you talk to a firefighter fighting a fire, and he'll tell you I was on the third floor and it was dark and it was hot and I was waiting for the guys to open the roof. And you talk to the captain, he said, well, I'm on the second floor and I'm humping hose up to the guy and I'm telling him what to do. You talk to the battalion chief, he's down on the first floor telling all the other companies what to do. And you talk to the deputy chief, he's out in the street. And he's directing all the traffic going around, telling people where to stretch in from, and directing the strategy of it. So each have a different view of the fire scene. That's just with fires. Then you have all the different things the fire department responds to, and the different aspects of it. There's the changes on the fire department and how it went from being an Irish-German fire department to an Italian fire department to an African-American fire department, and now it's going to an Hispanic fire department, and all the friction and everything goes with that. It's a long story. I cover 80 years, so it's a long story of humanity, basically, and of Newark. And Newark is a immigrant city, it's been changing. One of the guys called it succession. It went from Irish and German to Italian to African American. Now it's going to Hispanic, and the Asians are starting to come in, and now Eastern Europeans are starting to come in. So it's continually changing, and that's also what it's about, because guys are part of Newark. You have to be a Newark resident to be a Newark firefighter. Then with the other things that I wrote about, I wrote about New Jersey's first Chinese community. That's a subject that I stumbled onto. And then I wrote about, this is a children's book that I wrote, a young adult book that I wrote about MS, because I have MS, and so how does it affect children? How does it affect a teenage boy when he finds out his mother has MS? What can he do about it? So those all have required research that I had to, this took 2.5 years to write. It's a very thin book, but it took 2.5 years to write it. And then with the novel, I had to make sure I had all the facts correct before I put it down. I can't give a book to a child to read that has misinformation in it. So it took research. So it's as he was talking about research is involved with everything.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a thoughtful answer, Neil. So yeah, Ethan and Mark, how did you get started finding these untold stories?
Sure. And I think certainly surfacing untold stories is such an important part of the narrative. And it is digging into the research and the archives and, reading the words of people that are long gone. It's their voice that's being transmitted through time to today. I'll talk about one reference I find interesting, and so much has been digitized and available online. The Library of Congress has done a tremendous job in digitizing newspapers from around the country, and you can go to their website and search through newspapers all over the United States. You can zero in on New Jersey, on communities within New Jersey, and it's just fun sometimes to sit there and pop in certain search words or keywords and see what pops up in these newspapers, and again, read the words from the past. Sometimes, again, these untold stories can be surfaced out of, things like that. But again, I believe it's really digging into those sorts of sources.
Yep, thank you. That was a really thoughtful answer.
Yeah, a lot of where we get our stories from is through archival material, whether it be physical or digital. So much. We were fortunate to have so much that have been made accessible to us and others. So we were grateful for the resources that we had in putting this book together. So it was it was a lengthy process, but in the end it was worth it, and we so yeah.
Well, untold stories, my process, as I mentioned before, was largely interviews. And with the process of interviews, inevitably, you come up with stories that are not in the archives, they're not written down, and so it becomes a told story. I'll give you a couple of examples. One example is I was talking to a harbor pilot, the guy who's responsible for actually docking the ship by means of tugs, and he told some stories about ships that had run aground, and that's not usually written up. It's usually kind of covered up. And he had to explain how he went about getting these ships ungrounded. Part of it is just patience, waiting for the tide to come in. And maybe you get lucky and the ship will float up. So that's one example. But there's many such examples. I never got to talk to Malcolm McLean, who was the actual inventor of the container. But by the time I came along, he was no longer granting interviews. But I was able to talk to some of his lieutenants. And for example, from them, I learned the story. Originally, when containerization, the containers were on board the ship, and so was the crane. And the crane on the ship would take the container and put it on the dock. And there was a junior engineer, and he went to see Malcolm McLean. He said, "Hey, why don't we put the cranes on the dock, and then we'll have more room on the ship for containers, and we'll make more profit." And he was terribly afraid that he would get into trouble for that, but the idea was so good that he got away with it. So that's just two of the untold stories. I think these untold stories flow unexpectedly from interviews.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Angus. And I see a question online for Ethan, actually. Someone noticed that you mentioned photos. Do you have to restore any of these archival photos that you stumbled across? Because as we know, archival photos are not always in the best condition. So that is a great question.
Yes. For a lot of the photos that we had were mostly in good condition, but there were some that definitely were in need of restoring, and so so yeah, some pictures definitely needed some restoring, and I think they look a lot better on my. If I can, there's one picture I can pull up. In
Yeah,
here.
we'd love to see some pictures.
Yes. Okay. This one picture right here. This was taken at the Old Bridge schoolhouse that was on I think Cosman Street. Yeah. So the original photograph is very faded. Like it's hard to make out some of the kids, but I was able to get this photograph restored with some help from the family, and you can see. I mean, I don't know how well you can see this, but it looks a lot better than the original does.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. And that was a really good question. So thank you for asking from online, too. And it kind of ties into my next question is there anything you learned about yourself during your writing process? And I'm kind of curious for you, Neil, especially, because this is a deeply personal book for you, writing about MS and also writing about firefighters. So was there anything that you learned about yourself while you were writing your books? And this is also a question for each of you afterwards.
Okay, so I learned how to deal with change, the best way to describe it. When I was diagnosed with MS, I was assigned to the busiest engine company in the state, and I was fighting fires on a daily basis, which means throwing my turnout gear on, throwing a tank on my back, and crawling into a burning building. When I was diagnosed, first, my last run after being diagnosed was to a 2-alarm fire. And the battalion chief kept asking me questions, and the deputy chief kept asking me questions. Then we got back to the firehouse. The deputy chief ordered me out of the firehouse because nobody wanted the responsibility of having somebody with MS fighting a fire. So I had to adjust to that. On top of that, I was studying for an MBA in international business. I had gotten a BA in Asian studies and spoke, read and write Chinese. I just recently married a woman from Taiwan, and we were planning a life of going back and forth to Asia. And then I started studying for an international degree in international business in January, and in April, they told me I had MS, and I couldn't do that. So there was a lot of adjustment going on, and writing helped with the adjustments, but it also gave me relevance. Because I could no longer, I had been used to doing things like fighting fires, which is a very immediate need. It wasn't something you had to rationalize or think in your mind, how am I being relevant to society? It's pretty obvious that you're doing something that is important and relevant to society. And then after that, it's kind of like justifying to yourself, what can I do now? Why am I being a drag on the fire department? Because I went from that to instructing people on how to fight fires. So it was an adjustment. Then from there I adjusted. I went back to Asian studies and did the master's in Asian studies with the hope of going on for a PhD. But then it got to the point of, but then I had a son and a pregnant wife, and it's like, who do I spend the money on for an education, me or my kids? So I backed off that and stayed on the fire department. But it was a whole, writing helped me to look inside myself and make the right decision, is the best way to put it.
Thank you. That was a really thoughtful answer. I appreciate that.
Let's see. I mean, for me, it was just, I never thought I had it in me to do the writing. I love history, I love researching, but taking all that information and putting it together and actual writing it out was something I just never thought I had in me. And with the current East Brunswick book with Ethan's help, getting that out. Previously, there was another book about East Brunswick history that was first published in 1999. And then I also co-authored a book on the history of New Jersey cemeteries and tombstones. 300-year look at how cemeteries and grave markers have evolved over time in our state. That was published by Rutgers University Press. And that required a tremendous amount of writing. Some 250 pages was the section that I wrote. And I never thought I had it in me to do that.
Well, when I learned that they were going to do another East Brunswick book, and that they had thought of me to help do this, I realized that years of posting so much stuff on social media does really pay off. I mean, I spent the last, I think, several years just posting a lot of old images and such onto various Facebook groups, because some of this stuff hasn't been made available anywhere, and so I would have loved to have done a book like this much sooner, but the fact that it was already done by him, I didn't know whether a second one was warranted, but I guess enough time had passed that a second book was overdue. So, I'm really fortunate to finally have been able to put something like this together, and I'm glad that it's doing as well as it has so far, at least as far as sales is concerned.
Well, the question is, what have you learned about yourself? In writing this book, Port Newark and the Origins of Container Shipping, I think I already knew that I was a storyteller rather than strictly writing something for academics. I mean, I have to pass muster with the academics. There has to be footnotes, but I try to make it readable. My target audience is really the armchair reader. I already knew that about myself. But I think what I've learned along the way is it's okay as an author to take pride in your work and pride in your accomplishment. But you have to be very careful not to over-exaggerate your self-importance. You have to maintain a sense of humility. And part of my humility is I've written this book about Port Newark, but the humble part is there's still a lot that I don't know.
That's a really great answer, Angus, too. And I really appreciate you just being honest that we all have things that we could learn, too. And I feel like we're almost out of time. So if anyone has any audience questions, I just want to leave some time for other people to comment if they have questions for our authors. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Mark and Nathan. Images of America does a series of books for all the different towns. I've seen them in every state. Did they come to you and say, we want to do a book on East Brunswick, or do you pitch East Brunswick to Images of America?
Oh, sure. And the question is, did Ethan and Mark go to Images of America, or did Images of America come to them and ask about doing a book on East Brunswick?
Well, they had reached out about the second second book about East Brunswick. I'm trying to recall the first one, how that was approached. I mean, I think they were looking for local authors to put it together and reached out, but you still had a process to go through and provide all the information and a whole packet of information in order for them to accept it.
Okay, great. And I think someone else might have had a question, but I saw a hand raised. No? Okay. Well, thank you, guys. This went by so quick. I had so many more questions for all of you, but this went by really, really quick. So thank you, Neil, Ethan, Mark, and Angus for being here. I'm a history nerd, so I really like these history answers and the archives, talk, and it was really great, too. So thank you all for being here. So I really appreciate it.